Welcome everyone, it's great to have you here. I'm David Pollack, and I'm a member of the school committee, newly re-elected, and then elected by my peers as the new vice chair of the school committee. I'm also chair of the capital subcommittee of the school committee, and I'm here at the microphone to welcome you and make a few quick introductions, and then I'm going to pass you over to Ben Lummis, our Special Assistant for Strategy and Performance. And I also would like to introduce the people at the table over here, most of whom I think you know. Nearest is Joe Connolly, the Interim Superintendent of Schools. Next to him, Mary Ellen Dunn, the Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance. Susan Wolf-Ditkoff, the Chair of the School Committee. Neil Wyszynski, the Chair of the Board of Selectmen, and Jonathan Levy of Jonathan Levy Architects, who has just been hired to conduct this detailed study of the 3 sites that are part of what you're going to hear about tonight. And with that, and then this is going to be, we're going to try to hold the show on the slides to half or less than half of the allotted time so that you guys can participate for the rest of it. Ben, over to you.
Thank you, David. So I'm Ben Lummis, and I work with the superintendent and the senior staff. And so I'm just going to go through the agenda for the evening, and then I'll hand it off to Joe Connolly, and we'll get started. So as you can see, we've done the welcome, already have successfully navigated past number 1 there. And then we're going to answer some key questions for all of you. So why does Brookline need a 9th K-8 elementary school? What has Brookline been doing for a number of years to address our significant enrollment growth? What happens if we don't build a 9th K-8 elementary school in terms of what happens with all the enrollment and where we put children and students? We'll go through the timeline, aiming for a fall 2020 site decision, which you'll learn a lot more about tonight. And then go a little in depth just to share with you what the 3 site studies are all about, and the work that Jonathan Levy and his team will be doing, and then go through the next steps. Okay, so hopefully tonight you'll leave those questions answered. A few things you have handouts of the presentation, also frequently asked questions. We just brought in some more copies of those. We hope to have enough for everyone. These will also all be on the website, and we'll share that with you at the end of the night. We will have a significant time for questions and answers. If you have to leave early, or if you don't get your question answered, please just write it down on one of these cards. There's cards and pens on the front table here. Leave it with us at the end of the night, and we'll make sure to put that up on the website, put those answers as well. So without further ado, Joe Connolly will lead us off.
Good evening. I have the job of identifying, reinforcing the need for a nice school. And many of these slides you've seen before, they haven't changed. The need is still there, and we feel this need is going to grow, not decline. Let's take a peek. This is our slide that shows what's happened in the past 5 years and what's projected to happen in the next 5 years. So if you look at this column right here, the K-8 enrollment, you can see from 2010 to 2011 to this year, 15-16, the growth has been 814 students in 5 years. And over the next 5 years, through the school year 2020-21, it's going to grow for another 727 students, for a total increase over 10 years, 5 years back, 5 years forward, of 1,500 students, a 33% increase. That's, for example, the size of the Pierce School and the Devotion School combined. That's the kind of growth we've experienced the past 5 and the next 5. So clearly, this is a dramatic increase. Many school systems in Massachusetts are experiencing declining enrollment. A few are increasing, slight increase. We're one of the very few that have a dramatic enrollment increase. And high school isn't quite as dramatic, but still it's a very, very steady increase. You can see with the high school 9-12, in the past 5 years, the increase has been 220 students, projected to increase by 451 students over the next 5 years, for an increase of 671 students over this 10-year period. When you look at the combined enrollment, we're talking about an increase of 1,179 students, which is dramatic. And over the 10-year period, it's a 2,200 pupil increase, K-12. Clearly, this is a dramatic increase that really has brought us here tonight. How do we solve this problem in the best interest of the entire town? This slide here, it just reinforces what I just said. You can see the steady increase from 2005 to 2020. There's a steady increase. This year we're at, this is K-8, 5466, and projected to be at least almost 6,200 within 5 years. So, and by the way, this population, only going out 5 years means that children are already born, they're already here. So these aren't projections on projections. These are real students that are currently in Brookline, while the enrollment trends indicate they will be in Brookline. This, I think, really says it all. This is this year's enrollment by grade level. So you can see that in first grade this year, our enrollment is 633 students. We always use the October 1 count as the official enrollment for each school year. So it'll be consistent from year to year. Our enrollment right now in kindergarten is higher than 633. This is what it was back on October 1st. And you can see the year before, we have 696 in first grade, 622, 704, 598. So pretty much through grade 6, we're averaging well over 600 students per grade. And in the upper grades, especially the high school, we're averaging in the 400s. And so clearly what's happening in a few weeks, on June 5th graduation, we're going to graduate 459 students. And next September, we're going to bring in probably close to 600, 650 students. So there's a 200 pupil increase each year. We're just looking at the graduating class compared to the incoming kindergarten class. And our enrollment growth also takes place throughout the other grades. So if you look at that high school, for example, right now, the high school enrollment is about 1,900 students. When these grade levels of 600s reach the high school in just a few years, the high school will easily be four grade levels of 600 students, well, at least 2,400 students. We're estimating well over 2,500 students will be at the high school within the 5-year period. So that also drives the need for a high school expansion as well as the ninth school. It's happening in both ends of the grade structure. Looking at the ninth school, what we did, we took these grade levels, projected numbers by grade level, using a 21, 22 to class size average. We divided the number of students by grade level projected over the next number of years, 5 years, by the number of teachers we'll need based on that enrollment. And we come up with what our projected increased classroom needs will be. For example, looking at this year, we currently have 254 rooms available in Brookline in all our 8 schools, and we have a need for 259 classes. So what happened last summer, we built 2 modules at Baker, and we rented right next door at 62 Harvard Street, we rented 3 classrooms on the 3rd floor of this commercial building next to Pierce School. So that is the -5 this year. We're projecting the -5 will become 5 more, so it'll be -10 the year after, -15, -20, -25. So within 5 years, we're projecting we'll have a shortfall of between 27 and 30 classrooms. That's driving the need for a ninth school. Some of the short-term solutions until that ninth school goes online, and we're projecting, you'll see in a few minutes, it's going to take at least 5 years to have that school operational here in Brookline. So for the next 5 years, we're looking at a number of short-term options. We have additional modules, there's always a possibility, additional rental space, especially here at Pierce. There's 62 Harvard Street. There's a possibility, for example, we're adding 1 classroom to the Pierce School next year. We're adding a third grade classroom to this building, and we're hoping to get a fourth room on that third floor that we're renting right next door. So they're the options we're looking at. Creating more substandard space. Pierce School is a good example. If we don't get that fourth room on the third floor of 62 Harvard Street next door, we're going to have to find space in the existing Pierce School to create another classroom. And what that does, it continues to give us more substandard areas as classrooms. They're at best short-term solutions, they're not long-term solutions. And of course, if you run out of these possibilities, modulars, rental space, the only solution would be class size would go up. Right now, our average class size in Brookline this year with 259 classrooms is 21 students, which is remarkable. And we only have 7 classrooms out of 259 this year that are over 25. And that's because Brookline has made very good use of what we call buffer zones. Each year when kids register, we have kind of a soft buffer zones between 2 or 3 schools. We try to balance the enrollments using these buffer zones. So we don't have rigid enrollment lines. So if you move into the Pierce School, no matter what the enrollments are, your child goes to Pierce School, we have a few options to help balance the enrollments. It's been very, very effective. And I really can't praise the school committee enough for coming up with their buffer zone approach. It has been very, very successful. And the fact that of 259 classrooms, only 250 somewhat, only 7 are over 25 is amazing. So that we would hope to continue that. But again, as you're increasing your classes each year and losing these options, class size will eventually become the only solution. And of course, as you do add modulars or you rent space, you're not changing the core facility. You still have an inadequate cafeteria, so you may have 4 or 5 lunches a day, lunches starting as early as 10:30 in the morning. And so, but these short-term solutions certainly don't solve our problem totally. They're just buying us time until the night school can be online. Any questions about the enrollment projections before we move on? Please.
Oh, you said that was net land development, and I'm just wondering, does not take into account potential for aggressive development. Does it take into account Hancock Village too?
It does not.
Take
And, yeah.
Would you repeat that question?
I'll go back to the first slide. This first slide, it kind of shows you when we do enrollment projections each year, we did this enrollment projection in October. And back in October, we did include Hancock 1, but now Hancock 2 has developed. So when we do next year's enrollment projection, we will use all the known developments at that point in time. What we try to do is not change it during the year, because now you're presenting different numbers. So we try to be consistent. So I'm glad you mentioned that. These numbers only include the known developments back in the fall. Since then, as you can see, there's been 2 or 3 additional ones. All right, they'll show up in next year's enrollment projection. So which means the numbers are only going to get higher because of these new developments. Thank you for asking that question. Other questions? Thank you very much.
So, part of the presentation tonight is just to remind those members of the community that have been watching this topic, but also members who are new to the community, kind of what has been done and what are the studies that have been happening. And the district has been doing studies since 2009 with 4 studies. The most recent, which you've heard probably the most about, is the Civic Moxie reports providing 26 sites. What's important to know about these 4 studies is they all 4 basically have had the same message. The first, which is that Brookline is growing and growing quickly, and the second is that it's very difficult to find any site for an additional school. So with that, as Joe has talked about the enrollment, is where did we find the classrooms and where did they come from in our existing space? So as you can see from the slide, is we've added 54 classrooms since 2008. They've come through classrooms subdividing rooms at Heath, Lawrence, modular classrooms. We've moved and we're spending over $1 million for lease space, of which BEEP is no longer in many of our schools. And then additional 8 classrooms that's not on the slide that were developed within the district and through modifying space. So through creative work and great work with the building department and the school department collaborating, we've relocated administrative offices to lease space, created classrooms, dividing larger rooms, converted hallways, locker rooms to provide for office space and classroom space, expanded and utilized the buffer zone, as Joe has already mentioned, in terms of how much that has actually helped us distribute the student population among our buildings. And again, the additional funding of $1 million for leased space, of which that will only rise as we need to find additional classrooms or additional office space and remove our staff from, or some of our administrative staff from our school buildings. So one of the questions we want to address tonight is what happens if we don't build a 9th elementary school. The town has been responsible in addressing the enrollment growth very well through the studies that have been provided. They've been conducting an inclusive process, such as meetings such as this. And now we're needing to move the community forward to preparing for the site for a 9th school and really hoping to have Brookline prepared for the next 20 to 50 years in addressing our student population. So here's some of the impact of what will happen if no decision is made. The shortage of 27 to 30 classrooms across the district will hit in fall of 2020. You'll have additional class sizes where in 2005, 2006, the class size was 19. Currently this year we're at 21. We would anticipate that we would be at 24 by 2020 without any additional classroom space. Also, just to sort of highlight, one of the things many people don't actually think about is undersized cafeterias. Joe had already highlighted that lunches would start at 10:30. Currently, we have 2 schools that are doing this now that are starting at 10:30. We have 2 other schools that are starting before 11 as well. So inadequate course space makes it difficult for students to actually travel in between classrooms. It also makes it challenging for PE, health, library services, and other sort of core services of our buildings. And so here, this slide is provided just to simplify for you kind of where we are today and where we expect to be without a new building. So we would be at additional larger class size, and we would have, instead of having 7 classrooms with students over 25, we would actually have more than 75 classrooms with students over 25. So your class size ranges, as you can see, will be ranging from 18 to 30 instead of our current range, which is 17 to 27. So as we're looking for a new elementary school, I just want to bring you through some of the timeline that we've had and some of the, at least for this year, what we've been working on is interdepartmental staffs and boards and committees. Is the Civic Moxie report provided for 26 possible sites. As a result of that report, the Board of Selectmen and the school committee voted to review that the construction of a new elementary school was necessary, as well as directing staff to complete further due diligence on 2 of the sites within that the first 26 that were presented. Bringing us up to November and December, just to review, is that the school committee and Board of Selectmen continued neighborhood association meetings, open houses, public hearings, and joint public meetings to address the ongoing issue and concern with the enrollment. From January to April of this year, also continuing joint public meetings, as well as a joint meeting and decision among the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and the Advisory Committee to forego MSBA funding for this school. And that was for particular reasons, that while the MSBA would fund 30% of the project costs, it would also take an additional 2 years to actually have construction and approval. That's actually if the town was actually provided approval. So given that we have Devotion currently under construction, we would not get any sort of consideration or approval for a year after that building actually opens. So the way MSBA works is that you need to have a priority project, and you can only have one project at a time. So with Devotion underway, it was going to take significant time for us to actually have access to MSBA funding. In addition, also, there's been a number of board and committee meetings with across the town in terms of reviewing the potential for sites for the ninth school, where it would be in different collaboration and consideration for a variety of boards and commissions who have some jurisdiction over town-owned property. This is the current timeline of which the interdepartmental staff that is working together is keeping the boards and committees on track and on time. So it's a very aggressive timetable. Some people refer to it as an aspirational timetable. Currently, we have met one of our first critical needs, which is selecting the Jonathan Levy architectural firm for the site studies. Town meeting will be receiving a request to appropriate funds for a feasibility study for both the ninth school and the high school, as well as we go through September and October, the site selection needs to happen. That is a critical decision point. The school committee and board of selectmen must select a site in October in order for us to have a building built by fall of 2020. Missing that mark will force significant stress on our buildings and in addressing our enrollment if that deadline is met. So again, in red, September 2020, we need to be moving into a ninth school building. The three sites are the following. We call the first one the Village School, which is Harvard Street. It's the one with the grocery store located on it. Beverly Road, which is actually the Baker School site, as well as Baldwin School and the Sewell Rec Center. So what the Jonathan Levy Architects has been assigned to do is study each of the sites for its practical nature in terms of placing a school on it. So what's provided here is a list of the number of consultants that will be hired and sort of their time and effort. So for example, in the geotechnical and the particular site on Harvard Street with the grocery store, geotechnical is a medium because we don't necessarily need to know everything about, geotechnically everything about the site, but we do need to know enough to know whether the site is actually viable in that regard, as well as others, including, and you'll see, and also there will be traffic studies done as well. The whole review is not meant to be exhaustive. It's really meant to give the school committee and the board of selectmen enough information to be able to select a site in October. Beverly Road, which is the Baker School site, as well. Again, geotechnical is high with time and effort, for example, that they would be spending their time because of the ledge and the drop-off in the back of the property. Baldwin and Sewell, as well, is the property outline, as you can see, as well as their geotechnical, just for example, is medium, because generally we need to just know enough about the site. But also wanting to let you know, and the community know, that there's also staff work that's being done to support the studies that are going on that involve eminent domain and legal acquisition of sites, land restrictions that may be impending or impacting the site, funding pathway in terms of when would an override vote be, what is the debt financing, and all of that, and when would those occur. Continuing public input and feedback similar to meetings such as this, as well as annual updates to demographic and enrollment information. So here's really kind of our next steps of where we're going to go from here. So June 7th, there'll be an additional joint school committee and Board of Selectmen meeting. June through September, the site studies will be completed. September through October, we'll have final public input to both the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. And then October, the Board of Selectmen and the school committee make a final selection, site selection. If you'd like ongoing information and updates, these are the, this slide is provided in the handout. This is where you can locate more information and the time and location of the June 7th meeting. So with that, we're gonna leave this slide up and open for question and answers so that we can gather some more input from you.
So folks, I will facilitate the question and answer, and I'm going to give the microphone to the folks over there so everyone can hear their answers. And if you can speak up when you ask a question, and if it's not loud enough, I can repeat it. So, anybody have any questions? Yeah, let's go with blue here, then in the red.
So, it seems to be that every time we come here and there's a presentation, there is not really much appetite for whatever reason in the town for kind of acknowledging the fact that it seems like the Hancock Village expansions just keep coming. So I guess my concern is hearing all this money that's being spent on all these feasibility studies. You know, there's been a lot of money spent to date. There really isn't a really good hard look at the numbers. And as a constituent, I'm a little frustrated that there isn't more of, there's always a legal way to stop things if we feel like it's bad for the town, and I am concerned about the growing population, coupled with the fact that the school committee doesn't really seem to be taking the new numbers into account and keep saying, oh, we'll get to that, we'll get to that. But at this point, if we're spending a lot of money to do studies, we should be realistic about the numbers. That was a comment. Well, what are you doing? Or what are the numbers? And are you doing anything? Are you also doing anything to sort of figure out what to do about these Hancock Village expansions that keep happening?
So I'm Susan. I'll take the second half of that, and I'll give the first half of it to Neil. In terms of the projections, what happens is that once a year we try to reset the projections. We can't reset them every time there's a new development that comes in, but these projections were current as of October. They're actually in the Civic Moxie report. They haven't changed since then. And so what's happening over the course of this coming summer is that we will redo the enrollment projection based on a variety of things. One is new 40B developments that come in. One is condo conversions that come in because it's another source, or they're just other kinds of structures that are being built on existing footprint or on new footprints. And so each summer and in the fall we update the enrollment projection. So I think that's why you're seeing this at this point in time. I mean, for the broader question of what are we doing, the school committee doesn't have a role in stopping enrollment. We just deal with them when they come. We try to do our best. But in terms of that one, I'm going to hand it over.
But it seems like if you know it's just going to, if the numbers are just going to keep growing, I just don't want to, I want to know that you are planning for the numbers growing even if you're not releasing them on the fly.
No, we have a sense of what they are. Yeah.
Ben just put the enrollment, this year's enrollment projection up. We put a great deal of time and effort into it. And believe me, we spend hours and hours on this to keep it as accurate as possible. And as Susan said, we really can't adjust it every month. We watch it closely, and all of our projections for space needs are based on these enrollments. Our staffing needs, our space needs, we take it very seriously, very conscientiously, we track it very closely. Okay? Thank you, Ben.
Let me just say a little something about 40B. Right now, we have Hancock 1 that has been permitted and is currently being litigated. We have Hancock 2. We have four additional 40Bs before us. There are more coming. 40B, we can't just stop 40Bs. 40B is set up to defeat local zoning. The good news is if all of the current projects being proposed were approved tomorrow, we would be hitting this 10% safe harbor, so there's light at the end of the tunnel. But 40B is a fact of life, and we just have to deal with it. We don't know what's going to be approved. We don't know the nature of the projects. Some of the projects, I know one 40B that's coming before us in the near future is going to be senior housing. So, there are things perhaps we can negotiate, but in the end, 40B projects are very, very difficult to stop, and the law is set up that way. We can't just snap the finger and stop it. So we just have to be realistic, and as they're proposed, we'll see the effects.
I just want to speak to the question about long-range planning in relation to K-8 enrollment. We've identified 3 sites that the architects are going to be studying, 2 South Brookline sites and 1 North Brookline site. And then there are all the host of other sites that were looked at previously in both North and South Brookline. And due to the nature of the geography of the town, particularly with all of the golf courses and cemeteries and everything in the middle, and the large properties, large estates and everything in the middle, it's a great distance between the two. And where the overcrowding is most intense right now is at the Baker School and at the Pierce School. And where the projected need, again, we're looking at moving targets with whether Hancock Village 2, Pudding Stone, is actually going to happen or not, or whatever. But where the projected need is anticipated to be most severe is in North Brookline and in South Brookline. It's both. And so when we combine that understanding with the need to expand the high school and the capital demands of the Devotion School project, the Ninth School project, and the high school expansion project, what it seems to us the best thing to do is to build an excellent school now, wherever we can find the best site, to fix the capacity needs for the high school, finish the Devotion project, and if we can get through all of that, we will at least keeping the beeps in the 2 temples, and with renting space if we need to, we'll be able to manage the capacity. And if 5 years from now, we're still needing yet another 25 classrooms beyond what we've built at that point, we will know where to put that school, because if we have built in South Brookline, we will certainly need to build the 10th school in North Brookline, and vice versa.
The red and the blue and purple stripe.
I have a quick question. Do you have more handouts? Are there more?
So I have a few questions and comments. With the 3 sites that you're going to be studying, we're not really paying attention to the 6 other sites that were narrowed down to the 20-something. Are those 6 sites still on the table? Or are they off the table?
So unfortunately, until we have a school, nothing is off the table. Meaning that we have in the past said Baldwin is off the table, and then Baldwin's back on the table because we still don't have a 9th school. So we can say something's off the table, but really it isn't until we have a 9th school. That's the real answer.
Why do you have three sites? I mean, you're concentrating and telling us you have 3 sites, which is giving people the impression that all the other sites are not going to be considered.
These are 3 sites where we don't have as much information as we need to have to be able to make a decision in October. We have a lot of information about many of the other sites because they've been explored in depth. So last October, we set out a timeline that said we would go through the first phase, and then this spring and summer we would do additional due diligence and make a decision a year from now that's this coming October, is a year from now.
Okay.
Is there- Oh, go ahead.
Two comments and my question. Then I noticed on the village, the Stop and Shop site, that, or at least I didn't think it was, the gas station wasn't included or the car wash. It was my understanding that was all going to be.
They are included in the study. They will be included in the
Great.
study. We don't want to take more property, we don't want to buy more property than we need, but they'll be studied.
And then, is there consideration to doing, at this time, to not do one large or medium elementary school, or to do two K through 8s, one in North Brookline and one in South Brookline?
So as David said, in order to, if we, let me say a few true facts. Number one, if we build a ninth school, it will be filled the minute we open it. So people say, well, don't build a school and have it be filled the minute you open it. It will be. Okay, so let's just, if anybody has questions about that, that's where we're gonna be. The question of a 10th elementary school, a 10th elementary school would be needed if we wanted to bring all the beeps back into the buildings, if we wanted to make sure that all of the class sizes went back down to our historical averages, and if we wanted to bring back a number of our administrative spaces out of rentals, in addition to dealing with potentially additional 40B projects, additional condo conversion projects, or any other new growth. So that said, do we need a 10th elementary school or a second 9th elementary school? Sometimes second 9th elementary school goes over a little bit better than 10th. We started talking about this with the school committee, and the selectmen started talking about this with the advisory committee last October. And we raised the notion that yes, in fact, to solve what would it take to solve the problem? It would take 2 elementary schools. Now, all that said, we are in a position where right now we've just passed a debt exclusion for the devotion project, which was very generous of the community. We've just passed an operating override, which was very generous of the community. That operating override was only a 3-year override, so we will need another operating override in the next coming years to deal with the rest of this enrollment growth, which everyone was transparent about last year. And we'll need at least 2 more debt exclusions for the high school and for the 9th school. So that's 5 overrides in a 5-year period. It's a lot. So the idea of adding a 6th override for a 10th elementary school is something that if we're gonna go there, that the community needs to be in perhaps a different place than what we've been hearing so far. So long-winded answer to say that for the moment, we are talking about a 9th elementary school, finishing the devotion project and expanding the high school, which is absolutely our need. And then we will keep monitoring the situation. We will probably keep a number of these things in rentals for the medium term, and keep monitoring the situation for the next number of years.
And then my final question is, this is no insult to any of you, Susan, Neil.
Here it comes.
It's not, no, it's not. It's not. It's not.
Would you stand up so we can hear?
Everyone wants to hear the insult.
Just so we all know that you're going to choose the best site possible under very difficult circumstances. But my concern is, do you have the fortitude, the political will? I'm talking to the selectmen and the school committee to make a decision and stick with it and face Brookline. It's not an easy group.
Well, that's the job I signed up for.
I think part of it is about whether we're willing to make a decision, and the other part, quite frankly, is whether the community is ready to make a decision. Because we are 14 people, and we can vote whatever we want. And it doesn't matter if town meeting doesn't support it, and if the voters ultimately don't support it. So I think part of this is not about why didn't you know there was a problem. There's been lists and studies and commission for years that there's a problem. And many people know there's a problem. The question is whether the community feels that this is something that we collectively want to support. And so I think the political will question is a question for everyone in this room, in addition to the selectmen and the school committee.
So, blue and pink from here, and then just on the structure.
What is the town doing to limit housing growth other than 40B? I understand that town's hands are tied for that, but there's numerous condo conversions, and there is other growth that does require variances and FAR exceptions. And what is the town doing to deal with that and discourage that kind of growth?
I think, well, the town's a official policy has been to encourage commercial growth. What you're suggesting would require zoning changes, which we have to study. But you know, there is a fair amount of room in town, given the existing zoning, for conversions from single families to twos and twos to threes, and that's an issue. I know the zoning bylaw committee has been will be looking at, but changing zoning takes a lot of time and has to be done very carefully. So that's not a particularly satisfying answer, but that's the way it is.
But they all ask for exceptions. If the town doesn't grant them the exceptions and the variances, then they can't build the size that they can't expand that house to make another unit. Are any of us allowed to answer a question? So I have an answer to the question. So here's something that we can all do for this problem. All of those letters you get in a butter about somebody trying to attempt a conversion, go to those meetings. Go to those meetings, object. If any of you is a town meeting member, I am told our objections count even more. But if you don't want to see, and you know, on Green Street, the tiny little street, the precinct 8 where I live, the precinct I represent, in literally the stroke of a couple of pens, they increased the devotion enrollment by like 100 students because of a 30-unit building built, and then another conversion, a 2-block street. So we have the power to try to change that. Go to those meetings and object.
That's true. Let me just say one last thing about zoning and the whole notion of downzoning. When we downzone, it affects property values. And so if you own a property and it's zoned, say, to family, and we rezone it to single family, your value has just gone down. And when you do zoning, you have to zone like an entire district. You can't just zone property by property. That's spot zoning, which is not permitted. So zoning is a very complicated thing to be changing.
Okay, I'm Susan Granoff, and I'm the town meeting member for Precinct 7. And I have a question specifically about the proposed village school site. That's where Stop and Shop is currently located, and I understand that in theory, during construction, there will be no reason for the Stop and Shop to close. It will be continually operated. This is extremely important because within blocks of that Stop and Shop are a number of Brookline senior citizen housing and housing for people with disabilities and other residents who depend upon that Stop and Shop for their daily groceries and other necessities because they don't have cars and they have no other major supermarket to access. So my concern is, how do we know that Stop and Shop won't decide that because of construction and because of the accompanying loss in their customers at the time of construction, since parking will be very problematic and so business will be falling off, what can we do to induce them to remain open and stay there? Do we have a cudgel, or can we give them tax breaks of some sort? Or how do we know that Stop and Shop will opt to stay where they are when in fact they may suffer a fairly large business loss during construction, if not afterwards?
I would say those are great questions, and the time to talk about them is in about 90 days when Jonathan's actually really studied this and looked at the logistics of the site and how do you add a school and open space and operate a supermarket and then build a new supermarket and then tear down the first supermarket, and it's very complicated, and which is exactly why we're doing this study, to test these questions and find out if it's feasible at all and how it might be done hypothetically, all of which is always going to be hypothetical because none of it's really architecture or all of the level of planning. I mean, it's all still would be preliminary planning even with this study. I don't know. Add anything?
Yeah, I was just wondering if somebody could walk us through, I guess from right now.
Can you stand up and speak up louder so folks can hear?
I'm wondering if someone could walk us through the entire process from this point to a school opening up. What decisions have to be made, town meeting, planning board, board of selectmen, school committee? Can you just very quickly go through that? And I know it was sort of put up there, but I'd like to hear it just little by little, real quick. It doesn't have to be real elaborate.
So, assuming we can meet the challenge that David Knight placed on us to actually pick a site this fall, that we would be at that time we will need to rapidly do designer selection and hire an architect for the feasibility study. And the feasibility study, because we'll want the feasibility study architect to hit the ground running pretty much as soon as we have a site. So,
just to step back a second, so the school committee and board of selectmen are the only two entities that have to vote on the actual site selection?
yes. I mean, we're not going to build a school without money, and that's going to be the voters.
Yeah. It depends on the site. So if it's the Baker site, for example, that is owned and controlled by the school department. Building on that site is very different from a situation where we're involved with eminent domain, an existing commercial landholder, that sort of thing, which is different still from the Baldwin Sewell site, which is shared with the rec department. So each site has a slightly different set of parameters around it, and that is part of what we're going to be looking at, which is what's the decision pathway of each one of those three. And frankly, some of the other ones we've talked about involve different stakeholders. The Conservation Commission, the Historical Preservation Commission, all of them involve town meeting, and they all involve voters in terms of a debt exclusion. So there's no pathway where people are running off on their own, making a decision that isn't going to ultimately have a groundswell of support. Does that make sense? I mean, we can go through each one of these. This is kind of a stylized timeline, but each one has some specific differences as to who exactly is involved, depending on the site that ends up getting selected.
One little nuance is if land acquisition is a piece of it, town meeting would need to vote at the beginning of the process, whereas if it isn't, the town meeting vote would be more toward the back.
Is it worth going through the stylized timeline, or does that basically answer your question?
I guess it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear it.
Do you want to go through this?
Well,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
that's all right.
So, assuming that we have a site that's been selected, then we need to jump through all the hoops depending on the site, involve other boards, deal with landowners, etc. But with a site, we do designer selection, negotiate a contract. Ray Masek, our building department project manager, is here somewhere. I'm over here. There's Ray, who's already on board with the whole process and will be with it all the way through. Feasibility study should take about 6 months. So the idea is that feasibility study will really show us what the idea of the school is, how it'll all work, and it'll have a preliminary cost estimate. And with those two things in hand, we can come back to the community at large and to town meeting in 2017 for funding to proceed with schematic design, which is the next step. And with that funding, then presumably we're happy with our architect, we continue with our architect, and schematic design is carried out, including a new cost estimate, and now we really know what the school looks like, and we've got that worked out by fall of 2017, a year and a half from now, at which point we would come to the community, both with, in an override vote and also to town meeting for authorization and funding to actually then design the school, which is where most of the engineering money goes. Architecture and engineering is for design development, construction documents, and then for construction funding, because we don't really want to spend $5 or $6 million on the design documents unless we have the money agreed to by the community to do the actual project. So we would be really looking to fund the project, construction documents and construction in a vote. That's not borrowing the money. At the earliest, according to this timeline, in the fall of 2017. And then figure 9 months for construction documents, 3 months for bidding, 2 years for construction, and we open in the fall of 2020.
I just need to say one more time, this is a breakneck pace in municipal terms. This is glacial in anyone else's terms, but this is breakneck speed in municipal terms.
Realistic at all.
Gentlemen in the gray, over the blue.
Well, it's realistic if people support it.
Sure.
Whatever plan is not this. No, it's not.
Last year, when we had the referendum question, it was reported that that referendum would increase property taxes by 42%. I think it was some equivalent over what it was doing, 40 or 42, but it was 40 plus, which I will pay by. I assume that that was the increase based on just the last referendum, and any new exclusions would be on top of that. And I know this is an impossible question since you don't have cost estimates yet. Right now, you can't have accurate cost estimates. But how much more is this going to increase property taxes in Brookline for people who are already, many of them are suffering? And to be very blunt, it seems you're pandering to the new generation of residents who are moving in Brookline to have the money to spend on increased property taxes, an extra $5,000 or $6,000, chump change for them. They get a private school education in Brookline public schools. And dinosaurs like myself and other families, a few of us that are left, that have paid ridiculous taxes for decades to make this wonderful town to live in down there, are getting clogged, and you just seem to be excluding, one whole section of the residential population, basically to satisfy the new generation. And let me say very quickly, we all have a moral, ethical, and a legal responsibility to give our kids a very good education, even though we may have kids in school, we may hate the neighborhood brats, but the responsibility is still there, and we should be able to do that. We're already spending 70% more than the national average for the schools. Now, this is an affluent town, and if we could spend a little more, I'm not saying we stop at the national average, but maybe we could keep it down to like 50% more. That would have been approximately the $11 million increase in the budget that was passed last year through a referendum. We're spending lots of money, and it just seems like there's an entitlement mentality. You want, therefore you shall get, and I don't think that's fair to a lot of people in this town, particularly when they seem to be piling into Brookline for the education, which is a very admirable goal for families. Again, I don't dispute that, but as Mr. Connolly has said over there, we seem to be in a rare situation where the school population is increasing. Why is that happening? Because we seem to be promising everything to everybody. We put lots of money out the back porch, and then we're surprised when we have lots of bears out of the back porch, and the taxpayers are supposed to pay for it. And one last comment down there, I know the space study went through a lot of things over there. I didn't follow that carefully, but it seems like the one solution would be to run double sessions. We pay tens of millions of dollars to renovate and expand schools, wonderful schools, even after all the assorted fiascos that seem to be endemic with any building project in Brookline. In the end, we have something that works. And right now, we've got the capacity, and it seems absurd to pay this kind of money to have the kind of facilities that we have. And with the devotion school, we will have to run 8 hours a day, when there's another 8 hours a day that you could be using those same facilities, spread out the population, and give you the capacity that you need, so that we won't just have 2 new schools down there. We would have the equivalent of 8 new K-8 schools, so we can handle the population now, handle any hopefully increase that would be coming, and then still be able to use existing facilities at a much lower cost. And if people are coming into Brookline for the schools, maybe it's time for them to make some concession, which would be scheduling their kids for a second session. And since a lot of these families are paying nannies, let the nannies take the kids to and from school. So that would be my comment, question, however you want to respond.
Thank you. must say, as an elected official, I take my fiduciary responsibilities to you very seriously. We have a responsibility to educate the kids in the town, and we have a responsibility to provide classrooms. And due to a lot of factors, there are a lot of families moving into Brookline, and we need the capacity to educate them. And we can choose as a community value to run our schools 16 hours a day. And I would venture to say that that's not a value that I would choose. So.
I would only add that there's been a lot of discussion about being sensitive to taxpayer needs. There was a big discussion during the last override, and it's why the selectmen chose not to put a larger number on the ballot. And so that is an ongoing conversation that everyone is very well aware of.
Yeah, that was a hypothetical number put out using a very pessimistic scenario that over time that with compound interest, if I recall, it's hard to relive the campaign from a year ago. Just under the normal Proposition 2.5 increases, using if I recall, it was something like a 10-year time period. The increase was something like 25%. So yes, Proposition 2.5 puts limits. The costs of providing town services increase over time. We try to do the best we can to keep it down, and I'm as sensitive to the needs of taxpayers and keeping taxes as low as we can to provide, but also provide the services our citizens demand. So.
This person in the blue here, back there, this one over here.
Yes, I'm Mary Dewart, and I have been involved in what's called the Coalition for Smart Growth. And one of our interests is sustainability and making a smart decision about the walkability of schools and adaptive reuse of sites that are already crying out for redevelopment. So our particular interest, the needs of South Brookline are important too, but the importance of really thinking about the sustainability of this project is crucial. And I'm wondering if you could just go to one of the charts, particularly what's called the grocery store site, and look at the column that talks about sustainability. I notice it's at the bottom, it says medium interest. And I would suggest that it's in the day and age of climate change, we really need to make it a high priority in our decision making. Not only considering making a net zero school based on energy use, but on the issues related to sustainability, transportation, and adaptive reuse of existing structures where you don't have to damage the environment as much in order to create a successful, sustainable project. I have a practical question about. I wanted to discuss that. I'm sorry. What I guess I didn't. Do you mind if I continue? Could you just discuss what is involved in the sustainability and category? It's at the very bottom. It's called medium. And in terms of the community value, that's going to be an overriding issue. Yeah, that's the cost of research. Not the final impact. That's the cost of researching it. It's the cost of what is the question?
I do want to clarify what that chart means. That chart is comparing the sites one to the other in terms of what is going to be critical to be decision making about one site versus the other. So they're all equal in terms of their sustainability importance. And certainly sustainability is going to be a very, very important factor in the design of the new building. But it will also be an important factor in determining which site is more desirable than another. And just to give you one little window of insight into that. I believe very strongly that the configuration of a school on a site, its orientation to the sun, is a critical factor in deciding whether that site is suitable. So just to bring that to you, that's one of the big picture issues that we'll be studying when we compare these three sites one to the other. So sustainability is very important. It's just not on the critical path of differentiating between the three sites. They'll all be very important from a sustainability point of view. I mean, our efforts will be very focused on sustainability for all three. And I know that's a value of everyone that I've spoken to.
So cost is a high driving factor, of course.
Yes.
But sustainability, the difference between high and medium is a little bit mysterious.
It's medium because they're all sustainability is an important factor for all three sites. Whereas we need to find out more. There's more discrimination involved in determining, for example, whether there's ledge on a particular site and the cost effects of that ledge, whether there's traffic in a particular, actually traffic is a very important factor in all three sites. But for example, historic preservation is not a very important factor on this particular site, whereas on both the Baker and the Baldwin sites, it's a very important factor.
So traffic is not equivalent to transportation. I just want to make sure that transportation becomes an issue.
It is.
In the equation.
Transportation is an important aspect of traffic, yes.
A question about some of the rollout aspects of this, given that the two hotspots in terms of the real overcrowding are Baker and Pierce, and the village site will address Pierce's overcrowding problem, the other two sites will largely address Baker's. Whatever the decision made based on all of these kinds of factors, one or the other of those is still going to be a problem. So what I'm wondering is whether there's a massive redistricting in mind once this ninth school in place, since there's not going to be a second, ninth, or 10th school or whatever to address that for the next 10 years out, and the projection of growth it is still in place for either of those two hotspots. What are the ideas of how that's all going to come into play, and does any of that actually factor into the decisions on the sites of where the sort of biggest problems are in terms of the density?
There's a short answer and a long answer, so I'll try the short answer so we can get more questions. Redistricting is you could do kind of a 30,000 foot level, or you can do literally street by street, house by house level. Both of those will happen at very different times. The 30,000 foot level will and can happen in a time frame like this. The house by house level doesn't happen until we've actually picked a site, because you can't do that level of, it's multiple rounds of public hearings, and there's GIS mapping, and it depends on where the new developments are. And anyway, it's a very involved process, and it's a public process, and there's public comment, public hearings, and people are looking at maps. And so that process is going to happen probably not before we pick a site, but the high level is something that we're going to talk about before then.
Yeah, so just sensitive to the Hancock Village 2 and other related issues. I appreciate that a 10th school is, that we really shouldn't be talking about a 10th school for these kinds of financial reasons. And I guess my question is, did the RFP for the two new sites stick to the three-section school? That's sort of the question for you. Was it the same RFP as the Pacific Moxie had, 27 sections? I see that it's 30, it's played out as 30 here, and I don't know whether, so did you do the same design idea for the two new sites? And if so, the one thing that I just would, if I could have my way, I would urge that would play a big role in the site evaluation is whether one day the site can be built out. In other words, just, no, I understand that you can't overbuild. I appreciate you can't overbuild, but I also would be terrible to find that in 2021 or
It's actually written, it's somewhat nuanced, and there's multiple configurations for each of the 3 sites. So, for instance, at the Village School site, it asks to study it as a 27 classroom school, a 3-section school, and a grocery store. It asks, and then it asks to look at it as just a 3-section school or just a 4-section school. In other words, to toggle on and off the grocery store. Not that we're pretty convinced that the grocery store is a critical need to the neighborhood, but it's a what if, and it obviously takes probably a little less work for the architect to try to do just the school. But we did ask the architect to look at a larger school if there weren't a grocery store there. And with Baker, there's multiple study options for Baker. Do a second school, independent school on the site, or do a kind of an annex to the school itself, and also just look at enlarging Baker with an understanding that if the night school were built in North Brookline, we might look very seriously at also doing a project at Baker in the near future to build more capacity there. But in the short term, as I said before, we're going to create a hardship on one end of town if we build this school on the other, and we're going to need transportation to manage that. And that's just within the limits of what we can do.
I just wanted to commend you for your excellent question about expandability, which building out is what you meant. And I think that actually hadn't occurred to me until I was hearing people talking tonight, that we also need to include a criteria for making certain that we understand whether a given site is expandable, if the footprint is expandable. So thank you for that.
Thank you for calling my sweater silver. I thought it was great. I was also going to ask, as Joanna did, about redistricting, but I'll do something else. And I also want to point out to the person who was talking about smart growth, to keep in mind that especially if there's a school built in North Brookline, as it looks, as we know, there'll be massive busing and driving from South Brookline to North Brookline, which I don't think is a great boon for the environment. So not to distract too much, I wanted to ask about Bournewood Hospital, which has been talked about a little bit. We know that a lot of people asked earlier in the fall about Pine Manor, and that Mr. Kleckner sat down with Pine Manor to talk about any possibilities for purchase there. And we've heard sort of anecdotally, I think, about light conversations with Bournewood, but I'd like to ask if there's been any kind of formal sit down with Bournewood, or if that's something that could happen, given that it's an ideal location in Central.
So Bournewood is a site in South Brookline that has some, for those of you who don't know what it is, there are some advantages to it that were discussed over the course of many of these meetings. One of which is that it's conveniently located to where there is a lot of growth in South Brookline. And it's a very large property. It's 12 acres. So clearly, if that site were under consideration, then building not only a school there, but potentially additional playing fields and other things that other people in the town want and need and have been asking for, could be part of that, a net addition to green space, which the town hasn't had in quite a while. It's good for redistricting purposes, for sort of walkability relative to places like the Baldwin and Sewell site. So there are many things that recommend the Bournewood site. I think one of the major ones, one of the major reasons it was not in this 3 is that there was a sense that because there is an operational residential hospital facility there, that is dealing with a number of psychiatric issues, opioid issues, and that sort of thing, that there could be issues with displacing those residents and trying to find those residents a different place to be. So for a variety of reasons, it didn't make it into these three. I would say there's continued to be substantial interest in town in that site and in studying that site. And technically there is in the 9th school RFP an additional services clause that could be activated to pursue studying that site in addition to these three. So anyway, that's kind of the short answer. And there have been discussions. There have been discussions. I've not been part of those discussions, so we can ask the chair of the board of selectmen. And there was another site. Oh, Pine Manor. Same situation. Pine Manor is well located, not quite as walkable. Lots of green space there. Existing buildings that are being used for educational purposes.
No, I'm not so much asking for Pine Manor to be considered. I guess what I'm saying is that I appreciated that Mr. Kleckner had a sit down and reported back on that regarding Pine Manor, so we all have a clear picture of where that stands right now. My request is that a similar conversation between Mr. Kleckner or Neil and whoever is truly in charge of Pine Manor, that a similar formal discussion would, Thornwood, thank you. My request is that a similar formal discussion would happen with Thornwood. Maybe it's a slim chance, but you never know.
Thank you.
So my question was maybe having a small chip on my shoulder in terms of how the Civic Moxie situation panned out for South Brookline. I'm curious to know so we do this study. How are you gonna decide? Let's say all three sites come back as absolute winners. Are you gonna decide based on need, based on money, based on ease, based on, we've heard a lot throughout this process of like excitement, that you're excited about certain sites and not about others. How do you determine if they're all amazing? And what happens if they're all awful, right? If there's some, like, Stop and Shop says, go fly a kite, it's gonna be crazy expensive, whatever. Baker, it's not possible because of the drop-off, and Baldwin doesn't make sense because it's just not in a great location. What happens then? Do we go back to the 6? Do we say, okay, now we really need to put the screws into Bournewood? And I'm truly, genuinely wondering, how are you guys gonna make that decision?
Yeah, no, so if only we were so lucky that all three would be amazing. So please just keep praying for that, and then we'll deal with that problem when we have it. I don't think that's where we're gonna be. I think they're all going to be, they're all gonna have trade-offs. I don't think all of them are gonna be horrible either. I mean, there already is a school on the Baldwin site. There already is a school on the Baker site. Stop and Shop's a little bit more of a mixed bag, what's the word? No, not mixed bag. Crapshoot. That's what I was looking for. But it does happen in other towns. Other towns are able to think about shared use concepts and properties in more densely populated areas. So I don't think that there are going to be any clear winners and clear losers. We're going to have 3 sites or whatever we end up with a lot of variations. And I think we're going to have to make a series of judgments based on all the factors that you've seen here. The one thing I will say is that I haven't heard among the 5 selectmen, 9 school committee members, and anyone in advisory that we should not make a decision in October. I haven't heard a single person say, if you don't find a single slam dunk home run, don't make a decision. Every person that I've talked to, and everyone on certainly everyone on the school committee is saying, we're past the launch window. We're already renting space, 11 beeps, we're renting 7 classrooms. We're not willing to have these class sizes go where they go. We're going to have to pick something. So anyway, it's not gonna be something that everyone in town is happy with. It never is. There certainly is a precedent in this town of a few people who don't like something being very, very vocal and not being on board with it. And so I think but just back to the political will question is, it's not just 14 people on the selectmen and the school committee and the advisory committee as well, and it is the whole town having to say, we need to make a decision. If there were a perfect silver bullet, we would have found it already. We would have found it in 2009, and it would be years into the building. And so it's a question of being grown-ups and dealing with trade-offs and making hard decisions and trying as much as we can to mitigate the things that aren't ideal about that site and coming together as a community and moving forward.
I'm just looking at the time here. If you need to leave for any reason, you can pick up an X card your way out. Right after a question, we'll put the answer up on the website, just so you know that it's available. So the people who are down in the white, the guy, this woman in the tan, and this gentleman right here in the black shirt. Yeah.
So, it's great to hear that there's this, finally momentum to move at what I understand in municipal terms is a breakneck pace. So that's great, and I think that, what you just said about recognizing that any place we pick is going to be suboptimal is something we're going to have to accept as a community, which is
Trade-offs.
trade-offs, suboptimal, however you want to call it. The truth is, the current situation is extremely suboptimal. And, to the point that the gentleman in the front made earlier about entitlement, the fact that we're at this point, well past the point where it was obvious we needed to do something, shows you how unentitled, in fact, the school community, I'll say, has actually been. Because if it was just a matter of, give us whatever we want, we would have been here long before the schools got into their current crisis mode where they're running on fumes. So, maybe it doesn't seem that way from the outside, but I think the schools are stretched and have been stretched well past the point where anyone who looks at them can say, well, they're so entitled. But I do think, though, that in the spirit of a breakneck pace, I do think it would be helpful to get maybe a clear answer to the question that was asked about redistricting a little bit ago. Because the fact is that the math is somewhat obvious. If you're going to build a school for 500 kids, if I'm doing the math right, you said, 25 classrooms, let's say. 500 kids, right now those 500 kids would be at 8 schools. So on average, you know that it would reduce population at the other 8 K-8 schools by 60 kids. So obviously, it's not going to be 60 at all schools. I'm just saying that's the average. But do you know now, can you say that if you place a school roughly in North Brookline or some of these South Brookline locations, does the ripple effect go through all of the rest of town? Obviously, for example, if you were to put a school at Stop and Shop, Pierce, Devotion, Lawrence would be most affected, right? Their enrollment crisis would be best addressed. But then does that ripple out? Kids who might ordinarily go to Lincoln, now come to Pierce and so on. So do we know enough to say that if you build a school in certain places, in fact, some schools will get no benefit at all, right? Or, you said something about people have to look at maps and this and that. It's just like, come on, right? So what are we looking at here? You can redistrict kind of, one could say definitively, if we put schools in certain locations, some schools are going to feel no benefit at all, or there'll be a small benefit. Can you just kind of walk us through that without, promising to commit to redistricting?
Having worked on the maps during the B-Space study, every redistricting map will have a ripple. So if you put a school in the middle of higher density, it will ripple, but some schools will be affected more than other schools. If you put a school in an area of lower density, the ripple will go further. So, but in every map there will be a ripple, and we don't know. And when you're drawing maps, you're making all kinds of assumptions. You can go one way or the other way, and the process is just going to have to play out. There were some sample maps during the Civic Moxie that give you an idea of how it might go under certain scenarios, but those, the whole redistricting process goes through a lot of scrubbing and community input, and would then have to be voted by the school committee. So,
Yeah, just one other thing. I mean, redistricting we're building a 50 or 100-year school. And redistricting is a one-time process where it's not fun, where a child who's a 3rd grader in one school becomes a 4th grader in another school and stays there until 8th grade, and that will happen. Either way, it will happen. I think part of the question is, are there maps that when you look at them are permanently bad, right? Meaning you've redistricted in a way that it's then terrible for everybody. And that we will not do. Right, there were maps during the B-Space process that some of you might remember, where you literally had to walk past an elementary school to get to the elementary school that you were then assigned to, because these ripples were so problematic. So we're not going to do that. That's what I'm saying. The 30,000-foot view, we will know if something's that bad. But the street-by-street thing, we're not going to know until you get further into the process. The only other thing I'll say is that redistricting is for a point in time. So for example, if 40B projects move in, if condo conversions happen, if other things happen and a large apartment building opens and there are 100 new units in it, those kinds of things blow up your map a little bit. And we can't predict when that's going to happen 6 years later or 10 years later. So even the best redistricting is a very educated guess, because you don't know where the kids are going to come in 20 years. And you're building a school. You have to build a school now. So anyway, you do your best, but that's why it is an involved process when you get down to the final map.
I just want to make a couple of quick points. One is that the reason we're building another school is to address overcrowding. And so it's not like there are going to be haves and have-nots in terms of having a positive impact on the schools. The larger buffers that were created in 2012 and the exercise that Neil worked so hard on put about 30% or 35% of the students into the buffers. And the buffers are used to assign schools back and kids to schools back and forth in order to balance so that the schools all work really well. Class sizes are as small as possible, very well balanced, and all of the buildings operate properly. So we build the capacity wherever we build it. It's going to help all of the schools. There may be more transportation impact. And then just the other obvious point I want to make clear is that the reason that we will have to do redistricting no matter what is we only have 8 school districts. So that when we have 9 schools, we'll need another school district.
Certainty that there will be some expansion at Hancock Village. That combined with the fact that most of the homes that are turning over in South Brookline are being turned over to families with kids. So the existing Baker School, already over capacity, can't take more unless it's expanded. Which brings me then to my question. Is there any chance that at the end of this process you might recommend to the town instead of a 9th school, 9.5 schools. A 9th school, say at Village, and then expanding Baker, taking off one of the wings and enlarging it so you have simply a larger school to accommodate the situation in South Brookline.
One of the variants that's written into the deliverables for the architect is to look at an expansion of Baker to make it, perhaps make it into a 5-section school like Devotion. So we will have a physical plan for that and an associated estimated cost for that as part of the whole mix.
What I'm talking about doing them at the same time, not phasing them, but rather because we know we'll need it in South Brookline, because of the demonstrated need, North Route 9, track them at the same time.
Sure, and when we will have all of the variations and all of the associated costs, and we'll present them in public hearings in the fall, and so we can actually talk about, well, any combination and what the hit to the pocketbook would be to the community. So we'll really be able to have that, exactly that conversation.
And we're really gonna have to pay attention to the hit to the pocketbook.
That's right.
Woman tan, followed by gentleman in black cap. Oh, okay, sure.
David, you stated that with respect to the village school, you asked the architect to look at two options. Number one, a mixed use where the supermarket would remain and the school would be there. The second option, that it would just be a school there. You've asked them to assess these various categories with respect to all the properties. How and when will you assess the impact on the community at large of the loss of that supermarket if you go with the option of just the school on the property? Because it's more than a couple of senior units that use that supermarket. I have lived in precinct 7 for more than 30 years, and they're not just seniors who drive into that parking lot and use Stop and Shop. Trader Joe's is not a full-service supermarket. We've had this conversation before, you and I. Some people go to Shaw's on Palmont Avenue. Whole Foods down on St. Lucie is not a full-service supermarket. It is important to have that evaluation in this. I agree with and appreciate all the information that Dr. Conley is given from time to time about the schools. I understand the need for a school. I was educated in these schools, so I totally support that and the increased taxes. But I think there needs to be some consideration, and you need to be upfront how you assess that consideration of this community at large with respect to school.
Okay, woman in the black, sweater there.
Question.
Oh, I'm sorry, sorry, get with our here.
Mark, did you want to, I'm not sure there's an answer to that, except that in September and October will be public hearings on the results of the report before a decision's made.
I think the question was how we gauge the level of interest, concern in keeping the supermarket. Is that the question?
Well, with respect to the option of just having a school there, I want to know how you're going to assess the impact on the community.
Yeah, so during we need to get the results of the report back, and then in the September-October timeframe will be a series of community meetings, public hearings, and that sort of thing on each of the different options, including that one.
So Susan, nothing to be done on this particular issue I'm raising until that time. Is that what I hear you saying? That's the time you talk about
Yeah, I know.
that decision.
We're trying to figure out when, yeah.
Well, I think too, it will be important for you to express to the elected officials on how you feel about the supermarket. I personally feel it's very important.
But I think when, yeah, it's when, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so at the very least, there will be a community process around each of these 3 sites in the September and October timeframe, and the various impacts that are entailed in each one. What are the traffic impacts? What are the environmental impacts? What are the cost impacts? Loss of a supermarket, loss of green space, gaining of green space, whatever that is, that will, at least it's my hope that that's what will all get daylighted by these comparatives, and then over the course of the fall, we will have a variety of different public meetings before a decision is made on these different kinds of trade-offs.
The issues you just highlighted, Susan, many of those that are on the chart that the architect is supposed to measure. I don't see where the impact of the loss of that supermarket.
Okay, I got it.
Is to be looked at at that time. It sounds to me like, okay, we're gonna squeeze it in a 2 or 3 week period, and that's the way we measure that.
I think it'd be about 6 weeks, but yes. I mean, but yes.
I would be very hungry if that's
Good, thank you, Mark. Okay.
To follow up on that point, I'd be very hungry if that supermarket is gone as well. Been shopping at that supermarket since it opened, and it is a great need for the
smart guys, smart people in Brookline, given that we're talking about a second night school, et cetera, that was really, I like that idea. I also, in terms of the silver sweater for my silver hair, can we add more to the contract, and when can we do that? And what kind of feedback do you from the community to start talking about, looking at the board seriously? So that is sort of one thought, one comment that I had. And then, in terms of the Baldwin site on the outline that you have is about twice the size as what the school property is. I'm on the park commission, so I'm pretty sure that the whole top part of the T, as you're facing this, is school ground, or is parking for the land, indoor recreation. And I think the bottom part of the T is school. So I think that is something that's important, not to you'll know it once you start studying them, but I think it's important for the community to know that the school part of the old land is the bottom part of the T. Yeah.
So absolutely right, the top of the T is Sewell and the bottom of the T is Baldwin, roughly speaking. And so I think one of the things that we asked the architect to look at was there need to be shared use and conversations with Parks and Rec, which started a while ago. But on this one in particular, there have to be a lot of that. On the Bournemouth site, again, it's kind of kept simmering. It never quite bubbled over. So I guess I would say if people are very interested in it, let us know. But it never did. We did not hear from the community an overwhelming groundswell. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay, so I think I said orange, blue. Down to the back.
So if you'd like to hear an overwhelming groundswell from Warrenwood, South Brookline, we can hear that. We can hear that now. We usually have first thing in South Brookline. I just want to talk a little bit about the redistricting transportation sustainability. I'm trying to really get it all part of the piece. I know that the redistricting maps in Civic Moxie were both preliminary. But there's really no way, without a school in South Brooklyn, that you're not looking at busing, the neighborhood of 500 or 600 kids to 3 different schools, in addition to later. And you're talking about dividing the neighborhood permanently, or at least permanently until there is a school built in South Brooklyn, into 4 different schools. Which I don't think is sustainable from a neighborhood functioning standpoint. And I also think, as someone who's very concerned about the environment and climate change, that the busing and the back and forth trips in cars that participate in school activities is sustainable. So I just wanted to put that out there. We definitely hear lots of those.
Oh, good.
So I have a question concerning the other 6 sites that were brought up earlier. And it seems that most of the discussion has centered on just these 3, but you're talking about doing feasibility studies on just these 3, and feasibility studies have already been done on the previous 6 that are still on the table.
Not at this level. There have been different pieces of different studies done on the other sites.
So are those sites feasible or not?
I think where we are right now is that these 3 are the ones where we need more information to make a decision. I don't think we're at a point saying those are feasible, these are not feasible. That's not where we are yet.
So those other 6 sites are being feasible, right?
I didn't say that.
Then why are you, it sounds as though you're precluding, as though you're merely focusing on just these 3 sites, and that those 6, come September or October, will you be presenting the pros and cons of 9 sites, or will you only need these 3?
So here's, again, this kind of gets back to the question a little bit earlier. Are the other ones off the table? We could certainly say they are, except they're not, because we don't have a school yet. And so as soon as we have a school, everything else will be off the table. I'm not trying to be cute, I'm very serious. There have been previous studies where we've taken, for example, the Baldwin and Sewell site off the table. It's now back on the table. So no matter what we say, it's still on the table until we have a site. So right now, we're saying that these are the 3 where we need more information, and ideally one of them, who was the one? Was it who said one of them was gonna be, oh, right, Adrian. One of them's gonna be perfect, because I was promised it would be. And that's the one we'll pick. Oh, 3 were gonna be perfect, so that's where we will be. And I think we will have to look, depending on how these come back, if they're all really bad, yeah, we're still gonna be looking at the other ones, because we need to build a school. Does that make sense?
That helps, but let me ask you a follow-up question. The question is, out of the candidates that you have on the table right now, given all 9 of them, what are you seeing as the most likely outcome?
I will say that in my mind, these are the 3 top sites, period.
Does that help? And the other 6 are not off the table.
Actually, there's 8 sites, because there are 6 civic moxie ones. One of them is the village school, plus the 2 and Beverly Grove Acres. There's 8, just to be clear.
I have a quick follow-up question, if you would entertain.
Answer to them, not me.
And the question is, why are we focusing on building a next school, a 9th school, that will already be at capacity by the time it's built? Why aren't we?
So I've answered that one already, but I'm happy to stay after and answer it again.
Okay, I think it's this one, that gentleman in the red. I think we maybe finish up with just 2 more. Red.
I'm trying to ask this for a while. First of all, Susan, you mentioned about elected officials and making sure that we make our points across. Well, there's a lot of us here who are elected officials from this neighborhood, which is precinct 7 in particular, a number of town meeting members here. My name is Phyllis Giller. And I want to try to reiterate and reposition the question that Mark was asking. If we look, oh, the slide changed. The slide that was up earlier, if you look at the timeline, no, not the village site, no, the timeline. Thank you. So what I've heard you say a number of times to the question that we've asked, that the Stop and Shop site, village school site, there's a potential for there to come out with 2 possible options, one with and one without grocery store. And we're hearing you say, oh, September, October, we will talk about it. But during the period of June to September is when a lot of that digging deep studies are going to take place. And what we are asking is not to wait till October to find out, oh, the option is not to have a grocery store. We want the grocery store. The neighborhood wants a grocery store. We represent the neighborhood. We've already had meetings with our neighbors. We're already hearing the concerns of our neighbors. So now, sitting here in May, we say that if in June 12th, our new assessment study person comes up and says, you know what, there's no way in heck we can do this with the market. The only way we can do it without the market. We want to know that. We don't want to find out in October when the final assessments come through. We need to find out when you find out, not 2 months later, that there's not going to be a market.
Right, so just on I got it. I think the goal is to finish the study in August. We've had very bad experiences in this town trying to hold public meetings over the course of the summer. Some people are here, many people are not. So I think we've gone away from the path of holding public meetings and updates on this in the summer. I think the idea is from the beginning of September to sometime in the middle of October is about 6 weeks when people are back in the saddle paying attention. And there will be concerns about each of the 3 sites that we all need to hear at once and put them all into conversation with each other. So definitely hear you, and we've heard a lot. And I shop at this, as does my 75-year-old mother. So we hear it. We definitely hear it.
The gentleman in the back, then we'll finish one, purple, yellow, and then black.
So this might not be something you guys are thinking about right now. I was wondering about staffing for the new school, because a big part of Brookline education is that we have really great teachers. I was wondering how you're going to keep the new school up to par with its needs.
So that's a great question. Right now, we're talking about the capital piece of it. We aren't talking about the operating capital, meaning buildings. We're not talking about the operating piece, which is staff and people who on an ongoing basis make education work and do the education magic that we need done. We do have plans for the next at least 2 fiscal years to keep up with staffing and be able to honor all of the promises made in the override in terms of salaries, numbers of staff, and that sort of thing. That was a 3-year override number, and we're just about to start year 2 of it. Past that, that's a conversation that we're gonna start probably this winter in terms of what's the next 5-year operating projection, budget projection.
One of the earlier slides showed we had a number of short-term solutions, modulars, rental space, substandard space. We're hoping to keep pace with the enrollment over the next 5 years, so that when we open the new night school, we won't be going out hiring 27 or 36 new teachers. We'll already have them on staff, but maybe in rental space or substandard space, and then they'll just be shifted to the new school. So I don't think we'll be staffing an entirely new school when it opens.
Who was the woman in purple?
Hi, so I'm still confused as to why we're picking 3 sites that are so spread out over town and not saying, not looking at the population growth and exactly that are, and the gray zones, the buffer zones that are being most affected by having these displaced, and how far are those kids having to go? So why aren't we thinking like a district where we think this is a district where we need to place a school, and then say, okay, what's the location that we need to put a school in that district?
So we've answered this a little bit and happy to talk a little more afterwards, but the short answer is there's growth in North Brookline and in South Brookline, and it's separated by a big,
Buffer zones are being most displaced.
all of them, basically, but around the piers in particular and Baker in particular. So again, happy to talk about more, but we should probably get the rest of the questions, because I know we have like 5 more minutes.
So, does Stop and Shop own the Stop and Shop, or it's owned by someone else?
It's, they are tenants.
Okay, so that property has been an urban renewal, possible urban renewal site for the town for maybe 30 years. And it's quite an extensive property. It included at one time the teen recreation center, a whole lot of different property. And I kind of support what Phyllis Geller's saying. If the Stop and Shop site is going to be a school site, it should be looked at as a part of urban redevelopment. Maybe it's public-private partnership. We look at how housing can get put in there, that the community would have to look at and consider something very different. It's a very complicated site, and it offers a lot of opportunities and a lot of problems. And since it's privately owned, it really probably is an eminent domain kind of situation. So my thought is that maybe somehow there needs to be a coherent process, maybe involving the planning board or something, that starts looking at that site and what some visions are, and that ought to begin pretty soon.
Could you just be aware of the traffic on Harvard Street? It's almost impossible in the morning to go anywhere, and in the evening or late afternoon, so that just busing and parents, it would be, that's a major artery right in our town and serves all the commercial areas, so that is huge.
Traffic is definitely part of this.
Yeah.
And mixed use is definitely part of this. Lincoln for the foreseeable future as swing space and as overflow space and swing space for construction. So in the next 10 years, we can't use Old Lincoln because we've got other uses for it, more or less. It could, after that, once the high school is fully built out and once the ninth school is fully built out, maybe, but there are other things that the town may want to do 10 years from now in terms of renovating other buildings if we still have appetite for that. Webster Street is a rental. We're renting space on Webster Street, that's right. Yeah. So we'll, and the 4 section in the supermarket, I don't think that was in the RFP. Was it, Jonathan? No.
So we have time for one last question. How about we just finish right here in the front?
My question is, if your site study is gonna include the site for the 10th school, we know the 9th school is already at capacity, could we get a master plan out of this and, think a little bit longer term?
So we'll have full options for these 3, and I think one of them may become a 10th school at some point. So I think the answer is we will have a much better sense of these 3, and we're not going to build on all 3.
We don't have to do this again.
From your mouth to God's ears. I just want to say thank you all for coming. It's fun to keep doing this with a new group of people. Some of you are looking at the first 8 slides saying, oh my God, do you have to make me sit through these slides again? And others of you are saying, I've never seen numbers like that. So just respect each other and your different starting points, as Ray Mesa keeps reminding us that everyone starts at a different place. I would also say that we will build a school. There will be trade-offs, but I'm not excited about the idea of the school is going to be suboptimal. The school is going to be great. And the reason the school is going to be great is because we build great schools here. That's why. This community will not allow us to build a bad school. None of you will allow us, and none of us will build a bad school. There will be trade-offs, but it will be a great school. And we will vote on it in October. So stay tuned and have a great summer, and we will see you back in September. That's what I would say. And come here if there are more questions.